Right, Stephanie's going to read, if we can gather together again, after that very expressive piece of Christ. That's great. Yes. Gather everybody together and get settled, and then we'll get ready with Revelation chapter 10.
Revelation 10. Then I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven. He was robed in a cloud with a rainbow above his head. His face was like the sun, and his legs were like fiery pillars. He was holding a little scroll, which lay open in his hand. He planted his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, and he gave a loud shout like the roar of a lion. When he shouted,
the voices of the seven thunders spoke.
And when the seventh thunder spoke, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from the heavens say,
Seal up what the seven thunders have said, and do not write it down.
Then the angel I had seen standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created the heavens and all that is in them, the earth and all that is in it, and the sea and all that is in it, and said,
There will be no more delay.
But in the days when the seventh angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to his servants the prophets. Then the voice that I heard from heaven spoke to me once more.
Go take the scroll that lies open in the hand of the angel, who is standing on the sea and on the land.
So I went to the angel and asked him to give me the little scroll. He said to me, Take it and eat it. It will turn your stomach sour, but in your mouth it will be as sweet as honey. I took the little scroll from the angel's hand and ate it. It tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth, but when I had eaten it, my stomach turned sour. Then I was told,
You must prophesy against all many peoples, nations, languages, and kings.
The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Yes. All right, finally, that scroll. Did you notice the scroll that John first saw when he was first transported up into heaven? By the way, in the ancient genre of the apocalypses, that happened quite a bit. It tended to be that you kind of went back and forth between earth and heaven, up and down, quite regularly. We'll see it some more. So finally, here's a scroll that John had been... Do you remember what he had been doing about the scroll? Crying about it. He'd been weeping. Why was he weeping?
No one was worthy to open it.
It couldn't be opened. God was holding on to it tightly. And the scroll, God would only give it to who? Ended up, he'd only give it to Jesus because only Jesus is worth opening, or is worthy to open it. But my goodness, it's taken a long time and a lot of trouble to unseal this scroll. But did you notice? By the way, if you don't have a Bible, you can again grab one over there, or you can open it up in your app, Revelation chapter 10. You'll want to follow along here and see what's going on in chapter 10. So finally, verse 2, the scroll is actually open. Finally, God's scroll is no longer sealed up tight. But how long? We've had to wait to finally get to actually see into God's book, or the Lamb's book. And what is in that book? Verse 7. Do you see? What's in the Lamb's book? Yeah, the plan of God. What's it also called in verse 7?
The mystery.
Mystery of God. What do you find mysterious about God? Everything. Yeah. It can feel like a bit of a cop-out, though, to talk like that, right? God moves in mysterious ways. Or Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong to God. Just can't figure God out. The internet is full of memes that kind of deride Christians for exactly that line. God moves in mysterious ways. It's Super Bowl Sunday, so let's take a football-themed one here. The Lord works in mysterious ways. The point? One of those guys seems to have a better chance of getting prayers answered than the other, right? At least one of them has 50-50 chance of getting his prayers answered. By the way, what do we not understand? What's mysterious? Usually it's suffering, right? Why does God allow us to suffer? And some of you know I've had this pulled muscle in my back for the last 4 days, and that's all I can think about, day and night. I didn't get a lot of sleep the last few nights. All I can think about is my shoulder. And I think, what about people who live with that kind of pain all their lives and who suffer like that? So, God moves in mysterious ways. What do you think is this mystery in the Lamb's book? Now that the book is open, are you ready to look inside it? But wait. To talk about a few other things first. It's no longer the Lamb that's holding onto the scroll, is it? God gave the Lamb the scroll, but who is holding onto the open scroll now? An angel. In fact, it's described as a mighty angel. So we've seen a lot of angels already in Revelation. The very first scene of, we have 7 scenes of Christ, because remember, this is the apocalypse, not of the end times. This is the revelation, not of the destruction of the earth. This is not the apocalypse of the final judgment. This is the apocalypse or the revelation or the unveiling of Jesus. The first scene of Jesus in Jesus' right hand. Do you remember what were there? 7, of course, stars. And each of those stars represented an angel of one of those 7 churches that John writes to then in Jesus writes to in chapters 2 and 3. Remember any of the names of those churches? Remember those? Ephesus was the most famous central one, great. And then there was Philadelphia, Laodicea, and so on. Okay, so those 7 stars were in his hand. Those were angels. Each church seems to have an angel. I'd love to know what our angel of Chinatown Peace Church looks like. Maybe not quite so mighty, not described like mighty angels. And then later on, when the seals start to open and the trumpet blasts happen, we see lots of other angels, but none of them are described as a mighty angel. None of them. Second great scene of Jesus, remember, this is an apocalypse. So the second great scene is in chapter 4, after those messages to the 7 churches or the 7 angels of the churches. And here we see mighty angel first in chapter 5, verse 2. That's where mighty angel shows up. I saw mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" That was the last time we saw mighty angel. Until now, chapter 10. He shows up again. All right? Saw other ones in the trumpets and the scrolls, lots of them. But here's mighty angel. And this time we get full description. Got your Bibles out again? Ready to be impressed? Maybe a bit terrified by mighty angel? Mighty angel is robed in cloud. Yes, robed in a cloud. And around mighty angel's head, rainbow. Face like the sun. Legs, fiery pillars. Trunk, legs of fire. And a voice, verse 3, like the roar of a lion. I mean, this guy is so impressive that a lot of Bible readers think this must be, or Jesus maybe. After all, only Jesus gets to hold on to God's scroll, right? What would an angel be doing with it? Even a mighty angel. And isn't Jesus the lion? Look at the lion's roar. Well, actually, Jesus never does roar like a lion, nor does Jesus ever swear by God. Did you see that in verse 6? He is God. Why would he swear by God? And in fact, if this were Jesus, we would have 8 scenes in Revelation of Jesus. And I don't think so. I don't think there'd be 8 scenes in the book of Revelation of Jesus. So, it's a mighty angel. Besides, go back to the very first verse of Revelation. I keep taking you back to 1:1 because it kind of opens up everything. The revelation, the apocalypse of Jesus Christ, which God gave to Jesus to show his servants things which must shortly take place, and he, that is Jesus, sent and symbolized or signified it. A lot of our translations don't put in that word, so I'm using the New King James here because it stays with the original word. Signified it by his angel to his servant John. Now, according to the very first verse of Revelation, what's the path that God's revelation takes? It starts with the one on the throne with God. What does God do? Gives it to? God gave to who? To Jesus. And then Jesus gives it to? But how? He gave him to show his servants. How did he show his servants? Through the angel, right? So it's God to the Son, the Lamb, the one on the throne, to the Lamb, to the angel, who then passes it on to John, and eventually John gets it to us. See the kind of the path of revelation there in chapter 1, verse 1? Very first verse of the apocalypse then shows us the exact kind of stream of revelation of the scroll. So sure enough, back to chapter 5. On the throne is the one who holds the scroll, and only Jesus gets it. He hands it to Jesus, and then Jesus does what? Starts ripping back the seals, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Only once the scroll is completely unsealed does Jesus pass it off to mighty angel who announced this. It was mighty angel who had announced the scroll in the first place. Angels, by the way, are really important. They're significant. Angels bring heaven and earth together. They kind of exist in both planes. Now we see them, now we don't. So angels are important, and this one is Jesus' own personal attendant. No wonder this mighty angel looks so absolutely magnificent. But the point isn't the angel. There's a scroll, the open scroll. Are you not excited? I mean, are you tingling with this sensation? We actually finally get to read the scroll that's been sealed up for all this time. Come on, John. You were sobbing about the fact that this scroll was sealed up tight. You wanted desperately to read God's mystery, to figure out God's plan for saving the world, God's plan for the renewal of all things, for the restoration of all creation. Go get it from Mighty Angel and read it to us, please. Are you ready? More than ready, maybe? Oh, but wait. Verse 3. Jesus' own personal mighty angel roars. A lion's roar. And what happens when he roars?
7 thunders.
Seven thunders boom blast right back. Oh no. What? First of all, we have the seal judgments. We have the scroll right there, and he starts peeling them back, and all we get are these judgments. And finally, we get the seal number 7, only to have that one telescope open into another series of 7, the 7 trumpet blasts, these blasts of the trumpet. And now they telescope into another series, 7 thunder judgments. Aren't you feeling a bit lamb-blasted? Yes. Now, I just want you to remember what the judgments do not look like. They do not look like this. That's not what God's judgments look like. hurling lightning bolts down at us. That's Zeus, not God. That's the Greek version of God's judgment. That's not the biblical view of God's judgment. How does it look in the Bible? Think about the way Paul described God's judgments in the book of Romans, for example. God handing us, we'll take that off, yeah, it's not God. God handing us over to our own destructive ways. That's what God's judgment looks like. God letting us get what we're determined to get. Those 7 seals that Jesus kept peeling back, remember them? Rapacious greed and conquest and war and pestilence and famine and starvation and death and all of that. And the Christians kind of get crushed under it all. They bear the brunt of all of that. Those 4 horrible horses of the apocalypse, they're granted all this power. They're allowed to just trample and gallop all over the earth and do horrible things to 1/4, 25% of all humanity. And then finally we get to seal number 7. And it finally gets open. We go, good, we can read God's book. Only to telescope into even fiercer devastation for God's creation. 1/3 of the land polluted. 1/3 of the trees destroyed. 1/3 of all the seas turned to, remember? What happens to the water? It gets turned into blood because we're remembering the plagues from Egypt. It's ecological devastation beyond imagination. But notice the fractions. See that? It's fractional, 1/4, 1/3. This is not total judgment. These are God's warning judgments. Wake up, people. Wake up. Next chapter, God says it bluntly. You destroy the earth, guess what? You destroy yourselves. Destroyers of the earth get destroyed. That's in chapter 11. I grew up on a farm. We said things kind of crudely. We pointed out that pigs don't crap where they eat or where they sleep. But we do. We're crapping where we eat and where we sleep, God says. You're bringing judgment down on your own heads. Over and over again throughout Revelation, it's the same message. God's terrible judgment is God handing over, or God stepping aside. God simply removing his powerful, sovereign presence. We say, God, get lost. And God finally says, okay, all right, if you want me to get lost. But that's destruction. That's doom for us. It's judgment. God is holding everything together. And if God steps aside, it all falls apart. That's judgment. In an email to me last week, Alice Ewan wondered about the fractions. Just notice how God's wake-up blasts, that's what a trumpet is, his wake-up blasts keep intensifying. First seal of 7, or first series of 7, the seals, 1/4 of the earth is affected, right? Next series of 7, the trumpets, 1/3. So, now, the 7 thunders, how many are they going to be? Probably a half, right? But actually, there's not just 3 sets of, you know that, right? There's not going to be just 3 sets of 7. How many are there going to be? Because 4, because there's all these 4 times 7, right? 4, all of creation, times 7. We've seen a number of them already. And here's going to be another one. Do you know? By the way, we'll see one more 4 times 7 even at the end of this chapter. But do you know what the final, the last, number 4, what that judgment is pictured like? A huge bowl. Yes, a massive bowl. And with the 4th round, the 4th series of 7, God's judgment is complete. There are no more fractions. With the final trumpet, he says, that's it. No fractions, final judgment. Just one more thing before we get to round 3. These thunder judgments. I just want to say something to you about these. These 4 series of 7 are not chronological. We're not meant to think, are we in seal 5 or are we in trumpet 6 right now? And is trumpet 7 just around the corner? They overlap. These are warning blasts, right? Back when I was in grade 11, that was in 1986. do the math, a Russian power plant melted down in the most catastrophic nuclear disaster ever, releasing more than 400 times the radioactive material of Hiroshima. I never remember how to say that. How did she? Hiroshima? Okay. That place. And Nagasaki bombs. The two combined. Chernobyl poisoned the land and the sea and the fresh waters and the trees and people, and the city there is still not inhabited, even after all these many years. Everything in all directions destroyed by that horrendous explosion. Now, does anybody know what Chernobyl means? It's actually a Russian word. It's just a Russian word, and it means wormwood. That's the Russian language. Now, remember trumpet 3 from last sermon. Here, let's put it up here. 8, 10, 11. The third angel sounded his trumpet. A great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky. Well, that didn't really happen. On the third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. Now, if you're reading in the Russian language, you would just be reading, that would say Chernobyl there, if you're reading a Russian Bible. A third of the waters turned bitter. Many people died from the waters that had become bitter. Does that mean that John looked forward and looked in the future and said, I see Chernobyl? No, I don't think that's what it's not predictive in that way. What it's I think maybe more likely is God mercifully warned us. This is a trumpet blast. Look what this name actually means, wormwood. This is trumpet number 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, and we live in the mall right now. That's what trumpets do. All the way through the Bible, a trumpet always blasts a warning. It says, wake up, guys. Disaster's coming. A war's going to come on you. When they blasted the trumpets around Jericho, they were warning the people of Jericho. You should maybe join Rahab. Change your life. Stop your destructive ways. War, greed, destruction of the earth, cruelty toward others. Using money, sex, and power for yourself, it will destroy you. God hands us over when we're determined to go our own way. We get what we deserve. But here's the thing. Remember last sermon, remember the last 2 verses of last chapter? It's not working. The trumpet blasts and the sealed judgments and all these judgments, they're not working. Remember that? Look at what, just remind you, go back to those last 2 verses. The remaining men and women who weren't killed by these trumpets went on their merry way. They didn't change their way of life. The judgments did nothing to change them. Jump down a bit. There wasn't a sign of a change of heart. They plunged right on in their murderous, occult, promiscuous, and thieving ways. By the way, that's a lament. Right? You're going, what can I do to get their attention? It's like God's crying. Everybody just keeps going straight headlong down their own determined, selfish, self-destructive paths. And so look what Jesus cries out from heaven now in verse 4 of today's text. He says, stop it.
Sorry.
That's okay. I don't know. I guess I've got... Thank you. So, all right. The judgments aren't working. Back to the text. Yeah, just like the computer. Not working. Verse 4. No more thunder blasts, no more trumpet blasts, no more unsealing. Verse 4, seal up the trumpet judgments. Do you see that? No more unsealing. Let's seal them up. And the mighty angel, immense beyond description, sends one big fiery pillar on the land and another massive fiery pillar on the sea, and raises right hand up all over creation and swears by him who lives forever and ever, no more delay. Point is that all of creation is under God's care, and God cares for it all. And don't think that Jesus is only interested in kind of rescuing a few odd people and snatching them off to heaven and forget the earth, and that God's only worried about you getting your salvation in your back pocket. This isn't a little small salvation God's up to. God's about saving the world. Okay, that's a point here, the angels over all of creation. So mighty angel, towering above land and sea, roars in lion voice, no more delay, no more unsealing, no more trumpets, no more thunders. The next trumpet is going to be the last trumpet. Time finally to read the open scroll. Are you ready? Already. I know, it's taking a while. Look at verse 8. Take it, John, says the Lamb. Verse 8. Then the voice that I heard from heaven spoke to me once more. Go and take, I think that's Jesus' voice. When it says a voice from heaven, it might be the Father's voice. Go and take the scroll that lies open in the hand of the angel who's standing on the sea and on the land. Would you do it? Would you go up to mighty angel? I'd be intimidated. I think John is too. He's acting kind of shaky and timid. He goes up to the angel and says, can I have it? And the angel has to say the same thing again. Did you notice that? Take it, John. Like God says, take it. And then John goes, may I? And the angel says, yeah, take it. And John takes what looks like a very tiny scroll because the angel is so immense. What does the angel say? Take it and eat it. That's what I did when I was young. All my books when I was very young, they were plastic or they were thick cardboard, and they had teeth marks all over them. Because that's what I did. I ate them. And if you feed a book to Stanley, he will eat it. That's what a dog does, right? Be like a dog with a bone. Chew on this. It's sweet like honey. It's life-giving. It's good news. John, it's not like the judgments, God's absence. This is God coming to you and feeding you. Eat my flesh, right? Drink my blood. It's food. I'm coming to you in my word. I'm coming to you in my very life. God's plan for you is good. So God's mystery is going to be revealed to you, and it's me coming to be right in you. You've got to ingest. You've got to digest, nibble, munch, chomp, chew. Actually, the Hebrew word for meditate, which is what we're supposed to do with the Bible, with the scroll, with God's word, is haggah. And it simply means chew like a dog with a bone. Like an ongoing chewing. Masticate, ruminate, work it over in your mouth. Taste it, and then let it become a part of you. It has to get inside of you. By the way, did you see the headlines from a few weeks ago about that 16-year-old French student, high school student, who took Genesis in the original language and the Quran, chapter 13, and turned it into DNA coding, and then in his lab, he must have had quite the lab, turned it actually into proteins, and then injected it into his leg over a number of weeks. In very small quantities so it wouldn't kill him. I do not think this is what this is talking about. Nobody saw that? It was kind of all over just before Christmas, I think. So a bit over a month ago. The point, though, is that the Lamb's book is an open book. It's for all of us. It's not just for the experts. Not just for the professionals. You don't need a theology degree, or 2 or 3 or however many. You don't need to be an expert in the book of Revelation. You do not even need to know how to inject the Bible's DNA into your legs or your veins. It's much easier, and it's also much harder than that. All of us can eat. All of us can take it inside of us. All of us are called to do that, to take God's word, not just to read it, but we're going to have to read it in order to take it inside of us. But we're called to make it a part of our lives, and we can't do that without actually chewing on it. It's why, by the way, I preach texts. You will notice that. I don't kind of take a subject, typically, and then kind of find a bunch of verses, one here, verse there, verse, to say what I'd like the Bible to say. I mean, maybe I do that even with a text. I try not to. But the point is that you don't come here to listen to Tim's bright ideas. We're here to eat, to chew. But it's not enough to chew and eat and dissolve and digest just on a Sunday morning. We've got to get God's good word inside us, and we're going to just see why that's the case. We can't do our task. We can't live fully human lives. We can't pass it on unless we've eaten and digested for ourselves. Because even though it's sweet, it's not easy. We eat because we have a task to do, and warning, that task is really, really challenging. So the challenging is that the task is that we are called then to eat it, and it's to become a part of us so that other people will believe this good message, and they'll accept it, and the world can be changed by our sharing it. So notice what he says in the last verse. All right, John, share this. Share it with many peoples, nations, languages, and kings. There's that fourfold reference. By the way, guess how many times those 4 things that refer to all the peoples of the earth happen in the book of Revelation? 7. Yes, thank you, Ray. Yeah, we've already seen 2 of them. In chapter 5, it says the church is made up of people from every language, tribe, tongue, and nation. And in chapter 7, once again, the church is made up of people from every language, tongue, tribe, and nation. This is the first time now that the message is not just for the church that's made up from people of every language, tongue, tribe, and nation, but for the first time here in chapter 10, this is for the whole world. The mighty angel stands on land and sea, puts his hand over all creation. Here we're told that God's good news, the scroll, is for everybody. Sorry, have I messed up there? You're getting... I apologize. Okay. So, I apologize that my Facebook feed just keeps coming up there. Or Messenger. I was on with Alex this morning, so I think that's what I saw there. Okay, so, language, tongue, tribe, nation, or as it says here, peoples, nations, languages, kings. It gets worded a little differently, but 4 times, 7 times, because the kingdoms of this world are becoming the one kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ. That's the point. Now, how is this happening? Through the seal judgments? Through the trumpet blasts? Through those thunder booms of judgment? No. No, those just hardened hearts. Remember, Pharaoh's heart got hardened by judgment. And the last 2 verses from last week's text, or from before Sachi came, hardens hearts. You know that. Fear is not a great motivator. Fear tends to paralyze. Judgment paralyzes us. It doesn't free us. It doesn't inspire us. Maybe short term. Maybe the fear of punishment can scare the hell out of us, as I think some of the preachers I grew up with used to think. But fear and judgment can never, ever sustain us. After 9/11, the churches in New York City were full. But it took less than a year for the churches to return to their pre-9/11 status levels. That's what we read last chapter. After World War I, what do we say? Punish those terrible, nasty, brutish Germans. Heap judgment on them. Make them pay for their sins, we said. Make them pay massive reparations. And what did we get? World War II. We learned our lesson. We didn't do that after World War II. Past week, I read an astonishingly good book called Chasing the Scream, The History of the War on Drugs. It's an amazing book. One of the key points of this book is how judgment does not work in the drug war. The more punishment, the more policing, the more we criminalize, the more we try to crush down the drug trade, the more it spreads and the more it feeds on that violence. Just like the Prohibition era of the 1920s with alcohol. Same thing. Led to an enormous escalation in crime and to this whole bootlegging industry. So now our judgment on drugs seems to be hardening hearts and increasing evil. We need to get the scroll inside of us. We need to be able to ingest it. What do we need? A new heart. Outside judgment is not going to change us. We need to be changed from the inside out. We need to eat the scroll. Seal up the judgment. Seal up the thunder crashes. Seal up the thunder blasts. Seal up the unsealings. The healing of the nations. The renewal of all things. The mystery of God's plan for the world. The coming of the kingdom of God does not come through judgment. Seal up the thunders. Yes. It comes another way. I did not intend that, Faith. It's a scroll. When you eat it, devour it, prophesy. So what then is on that scroll? What makes it so sweet? What makes our stomachs curdle in that one? What is it about that scroll that's open that both frees people and binds them? What is it about that scroll that comforts us and can also convict us? What is it about that scroll that softens people's hearts, but it also seems to harden other people's hearts? What is in that scroll? Sorry, folks, you're not going to like the answer. It's next chapter. Chapter 11. It is. So we're getting there. Chapters 10 and 11 belong together, but this is the introduction. You have to come back again next week. But first, remember, the heart of the message of chapter 10 is that we need to taste, we need to chew, we need to digest the good news, we need to let it saturate into us and become flesh and muscle, sinew, fiber, tissue. It needs to become a part of us. This good news. From the inside out, we need a heart change. Judgment's not going to do it. It'll warn us. It might start waking us up. I hope it will. But the only change comes from eating that book, the Lamb's book. And then once it's inside of us, we can be the good news for the world. We can prophesy to the nations, as he says, or witness to the nations. Next week. But first, I'm going to conclude with a story. But first of all, any questions about chapter 10? I'm trying to do Q&A. Again, I took a little longer than I'd hoped to do with this text, but anybody wondering about what we read and how I've tried to open up what's going on in chapter 10 with this open book?
So you did such a good job, I have no questions.
Yay! So did the 1/4, 1/3, maybe 1/2, and then the full, no fractions for the fourth, the bowl judgments, that makes sense? Excellent. Okay, all right. God's shouting louder and louder at us, right? Merciful judgment. Wake up. Because in some ways it's fractional, right? God's not completely removing his presence. Sovereign presence is still there, but partly removing it. That should scare us. But fear does not inspire. We need to eat. Any other questions? No, we're good? Let me conclude with a story that I think pulls us all together. But a month ago, I can't remember whether it was before or after Christmas. I think it was just after Christmas. I got a call from this person I grew up with. I haven't met him, Tim. He's also called Tim. His last name is Yancey, which was my mother's maiden name. My mother was Norma Yancey. He's my second or third cousin, sort of, because he was adopted. So we grew up together. He actually grew up in a much, even more conservative church than me. Oh yeah, there he is as a little boy. That's what I remember him as. And his parents brought him to our church because we were more liberal. We had Sunday school. We did. So they didn't have Sunday school because, well, it's a long story. But they came. But Tim was constantly getting into trouble. I mean, he was big and strong, and he wasn't afraid of anything, and he would get into fights. And I remember one time he brought to a church function this big, long cigar that he'd gotten from somebody, and he smoked it in front of us, and we were like, whoa, this is amazing. So, of course, that was foreboding. And he was the guy who introduced me to porn, and at 16, he got his license, and right away, and his dad had this big, powerful Buick. And after church, we would often go to a senior's home to sing for the seniors. And so my two brothers and his brother, we'd all pile into his Buick, and the others' parents would go together, and he'd floor that thing. And I remember going over 200 kilometers per hour down the highway on the straight stretches. And, God was merciful, spared us. None of us had seatbelts and all that. Now, I'm not sure that I talked with Tim since I was a teenager. He very early got into drugs, just really went off on a different path than I did. And here out of the blue, he contacts me right around Christmas time. And he called me up. And he talked with me for over an hour about how God had rescued him from, he had been deeply addicted to crystal meth. He was a long-haul trucker, and he used to, when he came to Vancouver, he knew all these places. He said, yeah, I've walked your streets. I know exactly where you lived, Tim. I could have met him there after 3 or 4 decades, or 3 decades. And he knew where to get all the drugs and so on. And his life was a complete mess. He had lost everything. All his money had gone to drugs. He had started prostituting himself. He said, I was cross-dressing, and he was actually starting to do gender transitioning. And it's just not the Tim I knew as a teenager. And then he said, about a year ago, I was just so done, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then my mom called me up and said, would you visit me? I think I'm dying. And I went to visit my mom, and she said, Tim, come and sit beside me. And this is a woman who digested the scroll. There's a picture of her right here. I've got another picture of his mom. Anyway, yes, that's his mom. I remember her quite a bit younger than that, but she really did digest the scroll. I mean, she lived out of her life. She prayed fiercely for her both sons, Tim and Steve's still very much in the whole drug world. But she's praying. She said, come over, Tim, and sit beside me and hold my hand. And he said, I took my mom's hand, and he said it was electric. I felt something physical go right through my fingers, through my hands, and right up my arm. And he said it went right to my heart, and it scared me. It made me jump. And he said, I knew it. I knew it was God's love for me, giving me one more chance. And he said, I left there, and I went right to Teen Challenge. I went right into a drug rehab. And I never saw my mom again. She died a week later, about a year ago now. And he said, I haven't touched drugs since. And God rescued me. And he just went on and on and on about how now he's reading his Bible and he's praying, and he's been helping other people out of drugs. His friends are saying, like, what happened to him? And he's eaten the book too. It's changed his life. He heard with me lots of hellfire sermons. He heard lots of judgment. All through his life, he had been hearing people tell him, you're going to hell, Tim, and you're going to face judgment, because that's what we did in our very traditional churches. We scared people with hell. And he said, I had bad dreams at night, and I would wake up with nightmares, but it didn't change a thing until my mom took a hold of my hand, and God rescued me. I felt my mom's love for Jesus just right into me. I've been wanting to share that story with you ever since I talked for an hour. Actually, Tim talked nonstop. I talk a lot, but that time he talked, I listened. So, eat the book. Tim ate the book. Thank God none of us have gotten into that kind of lifestyle like he has, I hope. Or maybe we have in some ways. Maybe you're feeling just as broken and helpless as Tim was a year ago. Eat the book. Right? Maybe you've heard judgment all your life. I'm worthless. I can't get out of whatever cycles you're in. Eat the book. And now we come and we eat here. But first, shall we? Let's respond by taking our stand. Please sit.